Someone like Shackleton learned what he was capable of by making various attempts. We can only learn uh, what our potential is through the attempts which reveal them in the course of the attempt. So we try to make um, deepen our understanding of the Heideggerian outstripping or overcoming of metaphysics through looking at the central point of Zizek's and therefore the Atlanticist Western liberal position through what stands as the culmination of the Western thinking from Thales to, shall we say, David Hume. Let's say Hume as he was found by Immanuel Kant and taken up and brought to the concourse where many ideas fused and became confused, and then we got something called the German idealism. This is where Zizek situates his thought. As I've often mentioned, one metaphor he uses for that is the Kim Novak in Hitchcock's Vertigo, pointing to the cross-section of a redwood saying, "Here I was born and here I died," and he analogizes this to Kant and Hegel. How so far Kant or Hegel is to fill our charge our intelligence with what the essence or the definition of German idealism is. We can orient ourselves to that question by presenting Schelling and his essay on freedom as the core, and then perhaps if that's satisfactory, then we can think of the close thinkers as somehow radiating out from the core in maybe circumferences that are perhaps not simple circles, but going in, wobbling in different directions. This is seemingly the attitude that Heidegger has taken. So Heidegger has written several times in 36 and then in 40 or 41 on this subject. I'm going to go further into this by looking at the 41 seminar on this going forward, but I'm just doing this to see where I'm starting from. So this question I feel like I can best attempt to explicate through looking at the contemporary view about freedom in connection with questions of physics and the view given by Schelling. An intermediary who offers us some guidance here is Gadamer, personal student of Heidegger's. Gadamer says to those positivists or metaphysicians of presence, Anwesen, who say, Beweis, we must have proof, give us the proofs. This demand for proof in something like the way Hume presents his account of phenomena as sense data, as something, a sensorium, a subject defined as a kind of sensorium, is bringing in such a way that Hume gives the following example. If I have a series of shades of colors, say from the yellow to green spectrum, and they're given at a very regular rate, and then I simply remove one, and then he says, can we spontaneously generate the missing color in our experience without encountering that color? This is a presentation which suggests that everything must be first in the sensorium, and then we can reason about it in abstract structures where we can present it to ourselves and say, oh, what if this one is missing in its experiential presentation? That way we can then present what I just said, this formula that everything must be first in the senses, which is a Leibnizian formula. Taken that way, when we think about physics as phenomena, then it pushes us more towards this view that what happens first and the chain of things is what we should look at with respect to freedom. Things pushing things along in this chain, or somehow creeping up behind us as we walk away from the source of the river, I suppose, in another metaphor. But this differs very much from what Schelling is saying, and what Gadamer points us to by saying we do not die Bedarf keines Beweises. So no proof. The proof is not required here. Why? Because if we take it without going through steps like we just went through to construct for ourselves a view of what we're talking about, a phenomena through a sensorium, understood in this way and that way, and then plus you could add on n number of other things in a Cantor infinity here, because we have to talk about causality, we have to talk about how this Einstein is talking about things like strict definition. What I mean by the observer is a coordinate system in my calculus, or in my mathematical representation of the data you give me when I'm trying to do calculations about prediction of the way light's going to move, or whatever it is, or about the relativity, which is to say the relativity of mass and energy. So far as we don't have something that's been brought up from some question, which we haven't grown into but had to learn in some explicit way, then we're already at a great distance from the starting point of Dasein, from the opening, the mere opening. From the mere opening, we simply have the sense that there's things we draw towards, we want to draw towards them, even if we're in some sense compelled, we choose to. Freedom, it's not even clear immediately what we mean by freedom, right? So, taken in a kind of Aristotelian way, what is freedom? What's all the talk about? What's that question about? Must be encountered somehow out of our Dasein, because not everyone is born into a specialized knowledge of what the questions of freedom, causality, or determination are all about. So I think in our conceptual world, what's closer to us is this notion that if we can predict something, that means that there's less freedom, because you're kind of, this is the Philip K. Dick popular version of the idea of freedom and necessity, which is a ball is falling, you predict that it's going to fall, so you intervene and you grab it. You prevent it from falling, but it was going to fall anyway, but you intervened. This is this intervention into this floating concept of the one sensorium data, another sensorium data, there's a line of them, they're moving, and sometimes you can interfere with them or something. Somehow that's more natural to the way we're thinking, because otherwise, why are these accounts that are based on things like, a computer can predict a week in advance that your brain is going to be in this state on a certain moment, and that you're going to press button A rather than button B? That has nothing to do with the concept of freedom if we take freedom to mean you're going towards something that you choose to go towards and you want to go towards, and you get there and it's a free action. If we take it that way, it doesn't matter that somebody predicted that we were going to do that ahead of time. It makes no difference whether somebody could predict our action, which is free action, ahead of time. You want to do it. Pick a blackberry, let's say, if you like blackberries. That somebody predicts that you're going to do it and therefore has the opportunity to intervene and stop you from doing it doesn't mean that you're any less. It's a free act any less. It only means that that which is unfolding out of you through your nature as the letting be of your freedom can be physically interfered with, or it can be interfered. It only means that you're not omnipotent, in other words. It doesn't mean that the action isn't an expression of your own free self-directing. So in this sense, we point ourselves more towards this question in German idealism, which we can then think of something more along the lines of it's already demonstrated that we're free, because this kind of desirable things happening the way we want them to happen. We experience the same way that we experience health, perhaps, so that when things don't happen the way we want them to happen, that's like a disease. That's analogous to a disease. So you know when you feel sick because it's a deviation from health. The same way you know when you're thwarted in some way in your freedom, because because you feel it. You feel you're no longer in the good state in that way. This split, I think, is also illustrated if you look at what I mentioned before in the firing line episode with B.F. Skinner. I think there's more than one, but in the one where he's debating somebody who sounds something like a Catholic, there with the question of the nothing buttery, that we can regard this in different levels. So we could regard it from the point of view of the metaphysics of physical causality, understood as predictability and the ability to intervene and control the predictability. And at the same time, we could say these same things which we can interfere with indicate not a lack of freedom, but rather a lack of omnipotence. So just as the seed is freely trying to express itself and grow so that its crown reaches up towards the sun, seed of a pine tree, let's say, just because you can intervene in it, cut it down, didn't mean it was not freed up with regard to its nature. It was already following its nature. So this only indicates that Dasein, if it's following its nature, could nonetheless be interfered with. One way it could be interfered with would be that a kind of superego which centers things presents an ideology which says only this something like this human view, or something like what it becomes when you drop the notion of causality, because Hume makes this claim about not being able to, in a positive way, show that causality glues the sense data pieces together. You could show that in such a way that it makes us forgetful of what direct or phenomenological access to the problem of freedom shows us. So taken that way, the forgetfulness in Heidegger has at least this inflection of being misdirected in something like the way that Marx talks about, um, and in a way that we can somewhat translate into Freudian terms, which is that a view has calcified, which nonetheless people know is merely a view, because they have their direct encounter with the issues, and then they have a specialist notion which they've gotten at an advanced age, long after they've already been aware of being a human being. Aware of being a human being, I give an example that Carl Jung explicitly says that he remembers waking up at age 11 and saying, understanding his ego, that he's himself and not just enfolded in with all the objects. This sense, I think we can only talk about Dasein when we have that awareness. So Carl Jung gives an example, but then he kind of projects back and says, before that I was enfolded in with objects, and tries to act as though he could give an account of something that can't really be given an account of except by Dasein. So I'm going to go forward with this in a way that I give one example of how it's kind of like this Cantor infinity, where we're just sort of going along a line, and then we fall into this pit of the space between, you're going from whole number to whole number, but then you go to 1.1, and the space between the numbers opens up, so you can talk about another infinity. But so long as we're doing that, we're totally within the concept of number. So long as we're kind of trying to deepen the Heideggerian teaching of Dasein, we're within the concept of Dasein. So long as we have, let's look at this from another point of view, from the point of view, the concept of memory. Sometimes it's said that infinite association is triggered through something we encounter in an environment, like a smell. And then somebody says, well, that's how memory works. It's a causal thing. It's like smell pine trees, and then you think of something that happened many years in the past that involved pine trees. This would give us some predictive power, but it explains nothing about why the universe has this feature called memory, just like it has a feature called the visual world, because some creatures we can easily imagine just by closing our eyes. We can see it's not necessary that there be a visual world. So in the same way, it's not obviously necessary that there need be some phenomena called memory. Once you have the phenomena, you can explain it in different ways. You can predict it. You can do all kinds of things with it. But that it's there at all, requires a different mode of investigation than the mode put forward by Hume.